All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining the webinar today. The topic is bridging the data to decision divide. With me, I have Olia Grues and Jan Mehmet with me from both DataArt and retail. We'll do some introductions here in a little bit, but today's discussion is really going to be around the deployment of AI, agentic AI within the enterprise. We'll set our own, agenda here and talk about why we feel that really the topic of decisions is where AI can really create and drive value for organizations. But we'll also talk about, okay, what is the role of really getting the right data ecosystem? What does it actually take to set up your data assets, infrastructure, to enable this future, agentic enterprise and driving those decisions. Um, if you have any questions during the webinar, please feel free just to drop them in the actual Q&A box. Should be on your screen here. I will be reviewing those questions throughout the presentation. We'll pause at the appropriate times to answer any questions that you might have. We're also going to save about 5 to 10 minutes towards the end to be able to answer, any questions and have a little bit more of an open Q&A process as well. Okay. Now we've got kind of a broad range of different attendees today, and so we're not going to get into too much detail around, different data environments, infrastructure, et cetera. It's a bit more of a higher level discussion, but happy to jump on any calls afterwards and answer any specific questions that you might have. Okay. So let's get to some of the introductions here. I will be, the main moderator for today. My name is Lanny Royberg, one of the co-founders of Cloverpop, a leading decision intelligence company. I've spent the last 15 years really on the growth strategy side within management consulting, and then also within driving data analytics for commercial areas. With me as well, Olia Grues. Olia, why don't you do a little bit of an intro?
Thank you, Lenny. Glad to be here. I'm here in Chicago, where the summer is at its peak. And for the past 25 years, I've been working on delivering data AI-driven platforms and capabilities, primarily in retail and CPG industries. Today, I lead a vertical for manufacturing, distribution, and retail at DataArt, who is a global software and engineering firm with 5,000 plus global workforce, and we are delivering breakthrough data analytics AI platforms to the world's most demanding organizations.
Jan?
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks, Lanny. Nice to be here. Jan Mehmet. Uh, I have been in retail for 25 years and digital for just about the same amount of time. So I've seen all things retail over the course of time. Um, Most recently, I'm working with a company called N, which is a quarter of a billion luxury streetwear multi-brand entity. But historically, I've worked with numerous brands. I guess last year, coming out of a business I'd worked with for around 10 years was the Capri organization, who own Michael Kors, Versace, and Jimmy Choo. So looking forward to our discussion today.
Great. So let's get started. And I want to start at, a place here where we're gonna be saying the word decisions quite often, right? And the reason for that is organizations have to make about 10 million decisions per year. Everything from the very strategic, where should we open up new retail stores? So the more operational, how do we actually change pricing, to the very tactical, how do we set the various MOQs and those types of elements? And these millions of decisions that have to be made, they have to be made in a very volatile and uncertain environment. And yeah, and we'll talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is that retail is undergoing a pretty profound structural transformation, which is driven by macro and kind of industry specific shifts. Geopolitical uncertainty has clearly impacted businesses, disrupting supply chains and markets. And then there's margin compression and cost volatility, which is forcing businesses to do more with less. But it's not really just about efficiency. That's kind of no longer optional. There's more to it than that. And then you have things like sustainability, ESG pressures, the ethical sourcing, carbon footprint reduction, and circular economy models are becoming strategic imperatives. So it's not so much about just responding to compliance measures, it's reacting to the needs of the organization. And of course, the modern retail customers kind of connected, empowered, increasingly unforgiving. Value's no longer about price, it's about relevance, speed, convenience, trust. And then you've got this hyper consciousness that's developing where Gen Z and millennials are increasingly selective about what they buy. So there's a lot going on. And then within the business themselves, you know, there are a number of factors that need to be taken into account. Speed of innovation, the data and workforce dynamics, increasingly significant topics in businesses and are often compromised. So, agility really is an essential factor for all organizations now. And cross-functional working, you often see that that's quite limited. And sadly, there are still many more silos than I think we'd like. And then, workforce dynamics in that retaining knowledge and the knowledge drain that we experience in businesses is really prevalent now. That institutional knowledge and learning that disappears out of the door when you're not able to retain effectively is really compromising for businesses. So, with so much going on, there's a real dependency to leverage solutions that can support the needs of businesses through this moment and beyond. And I think that's where our discussion today really plays out because AI and the automation maturity that we're going to be talking about is really going to be foundational in supporting businesses in the future.
And if we go back just a couple years and just set ourselves up in November of 22 when OpenAI launched ChatGPT publicly, all of a sudden there was a massive amount of interest in the topic. Every CEO, every CXO was going on their investor calls trying to embed the word AI as much as they possibly could. Large companies started announcing big partnerships to really drive generative AI pilots within their organizations, starting to rethink what can AI do for them. Now, that the expectations for the technology are absolutely massive, right? Automating up to 1/3 of our work, increasing the GDP by approximately 7%. That's the equivalent of adding entire G7 nation to the globe, and really, improving productivity by about 40%. And there's no doubt that AI, generative AI, will have a transformative impact of ways of working, right? Less time spent on retrieving data, connecting different data sources, doing all that manual labor, and hopefully getting us to a point where we're focused more on the strategic elements, value capture, and those types of things, right? But if we look at those initial deployments of AI, right, things like virtual assistants, customer chatbots, HR support, it was very much a let a thousand flowers bloom type strategy. However, what executives found was the first wave of these deployments really had insufficient value creation, didn't really have a strategic focus, without spending much time in actually building out the skill sets, changing the processes to actually incorporate these capabilities. And so that's okay. It's a new technology. People are playing around with it, trying to test it. However, as we look to the future, organizations are really starting to rethink the overall strategy, right? Playtime is over. It's time to get practical. We see a lot of organizations starting to pull back on their overall, disparate use cases. They're trying to be much more strategic about where they deploy it, how they deploy it. And if we take a couple lessons from that initial 2-3 years, that first wave, right, we could think about 3 key lessons learned. Number one was hype over value. AI was launched with lots of scattered pilots, created a lot of really cool demos, but did not serve a very clear business focus or a business priority. Number two, models without mindset shift. So lots of sophisticated models, lots of capabilities have been coming out. However, sufficient focus on actually adjusting the talent and upskilling the talent, as well as adjusting the processes, did not actually happen. And number three, information without insight. We could generate lots more information. However, unless we're actually deriving that insight and acting upon it, what value does it create, right? So as we look to the future, really, we need to understand those three key lessons, which is AI creates real value when it's number one, anchored to business goals, two, designed for how people work, and three, built to turn information into action. And what better place to then actually deploy this type of thinking than the foundational building block of an organization, which is the decision, right? So if we step back, let's think about what actually happens and what needs to occur for a decision to be made, right? We need to be able to integrate both the information of the organization, the data and analytics, the human experience and expertise, and the business context and the process. Those three elements have to come together for a decision to be made, an action to be taken, for value to be created. In fact, Bain did a great study a few years ago, and they found that the quality of decision-making within an organization has a 95% correlation with the financial performance of that organization, right? So if we were trying to deploy AI somewhere, why not focusing around the actual decision-making processes of the organization and do it very, very explicitly? And so that's what we describe as a decision back approach and what we'll talk about today. Rather than starting from a very tactical place saying, okay, what kind of data analytics do we have? How do we then bring AI on top of that so we could search that information better and hopefully get some recommendations? It's orienting ourselves from the actual value that we need to capture, understanding and mapping what are the decisions to be made, and from then starting to understand, okay, how do I actually deploy these different technologies that align very well with that piece, right? And so if we look at what's in a decision, right? So let's take an example, how do I optimize my media spend ROI? Okay. Well, there's lots of different considerations, questions that we need to ask ourselves. Most of the time, these are cross-functional in nature. The best people suited for those answers are in different parts of the organization. They're going to pull different data sources. They're going to pull different analyses. But once that happens, hopefully there's some discussion, some synthesis, some debate happening. A recommendation is made, a decision is made, and that then serves to some type of a business goal, right? And that is the perfect place then if we take those lessons learned to apply to different business decisions, right? Every decision needs to be connected to the business goal. It has to align with the process and the ways of working and built to turn information into action. And so if you look at what happens in an end-to-end decision-making process, right? We have a decision trigger. The situation has changed, an event has occurred that will spur us to make a decision. Also, there's just natural cadences for decisions. Once that is done, now we need to actually model out the decision to be made, right? What is the decision that we need to make? What are the key questions that we need to understand or the drivers that we need to consider? And who in the organization is best suited or has the authority to actually provide that input or make that decision? We call that the decision model and orchestration. Then we have to make the decision, right? We have to synthesize multiple different data inputs. Some of them, is from clear data sources. Some of them are more, experience or expertise of the organization itself. We then need to synthesize that information to create the recommendation. That decision is then executed. And, a lot of organizations, fail to do this, but actually track those decisions, learn from them, and improve from them, right? So this is what we describe as a 5-step end-to-end decision-making process. And when we think about how you could apply AI to these different areas, right? In the first step, the decision trigger. So how do we monitor both internal and external data sources to identify critical signals, right? Such as demand shifts, supply disruptions, cost of goods sold changes. From then, it's going to prompt a decision needs to be made, signals it to perhaps the owner of that decision. And then AI could then support in the actual framing of those decisions. So what are the questions that we should be asking so that we have a comprehensive decision logic that we could go make that decision, as well as organizational graphs that tell us, okay, who in the organization should be in that overall decision-making process. Once we have that model and that the decision is orchestrated, we could go ahead and make that decision, right? So how do we then connect both structured, unstructured data sources, synthesize those various inputs, and then generate both insights and recommendations of what actions need to be taken? From there, we want to execute against that decision, right? And so we could either, trigger operational steps, triggering various workflows across those enterprise systems, so a decision can be made, right? Whether it's a pricing update, identify those shifts in media budgets and actually records those in our ERP systems, things of that nature, right? And once those decisions are made, we have to treat that decision as a new type of data, right? And from there, we're now able to actually track those decisions, measure the impact of those, and understand what is going well, what is not, so that we can integrate that learning in the actual decision model and orchestration. And so we're going to be sharing some of these examples today during both the presentation point, and I'm going to bring this to life actually in a demo shortly. But let's take a look at three different types of examples where this type of AI within decision making works very well, right? And we'll do three different stages, right? So you can think of the first as, let's call it a human-led AI assisted. And the second one, we'll kind of describe it as AI augmented. So the human and the AI are both answering different questions. And the third, a fully autonomous version of it, right? So in the first example, this is for a pharmaceutical company that makes an oncology drug. That oncology drug has about 130 unique raw material inputs from about 100 different suppliers. And anytime one of those suppliers is actually late on delivery, that delays the manufacturing of that batch of oncology drugs. It's about $10 million per batch, and not to even mention the patient health that is at risk. And so in this case, the organization uses a human-led AI assisted agent that helps them really understand, okay, what are the key questions we need to understand for, why are we late to get the vendor, and which vendors can we then go to and communicate with so that they can actually get us that drug on time to get the actual materials into the supply chain to get the oncology drugs going. And the second example, right? What actions can we take to improve brand performance? So in this case, the CPG company was spending, $1 million plus a year on brand equity studies. They were doing the surveys and they had analysts, looking through a 300-page document to then say, this is what you should be doing, right? So in this case, we actually created what we call a decision back model that says, okay, should we adjust our brand performance? What are the key metrics that we need to be looking at? What are the key KPIs that we need to be looking at? And then automating that insight and recommendation process. This allowed us to actually deliver those insights about 2x faster. But most importantly, the marketers no longer had to go sit through presentations of 300 pages. They were able to get to the specific recommendations and act on those, right? And the third example, consumer health organization, they spend about $1 billion plus on media allocation every single year. However, if you could imagine that decision has to say, okay, how much money do we invest on the brand side, then on the specific channels, et cetera, et cetera. And so based on that overall model, we were able to automate that process of making about 1,000 recommendations every couple of weeks on where should we allocate our media budget. So about an 80% acceleration in the actual time of insight. And Jan, you've got some, retail examples as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's always interesting, isn't it? Because you see a lot of companies that have resisted moving going forward with AI in a deep way. Of course, predictive analytics and certain analytics have been available for a long time, but there are also some organizations that have pressed ahead. And probably I'd talk to Walmart as one, huge global store estate, over 10,000 stores, 24 countries. They recognized the need to harness a lot of data. And so they went through a strategic implementation, leveraging AI in their inventory management. And they were really able to affect their weeks of supply and reduce stock holding costs. So, of course, huge impact on their business. And then from a supply chain optimization standpoint, they are able to do things from the monitoring of performance, transportation, logistics, etc. And again, reduce their lead times and improve their product availability. So across a business of that scale, it's going to be really valuable. And for any business, it would be valuable, but certainly for their size. And then just thinking about from a brand standpoint, great example in Levi's. And you would think brands that have existed for so long would have a really good view on their business, but they recognized that they needed to have a better understanding of some of their data and insights. And so, wanting to respond to consumer fashion trends, they looked at how they could detect and capitalize on emerging trends. They created a unified data platform using machine learning and insights that they could derive from various KPI and points of interest, so point of sale, e-commerce purchases, online browsing, loyalty program, all of the data points that they could pull in. And of course, they've got an enormous distribution footprint. I think it's over around 50,000 points of distribution. So bringing in all of that information and then looking at what it would tell them about trends, they were actually able to see that within one category, there was a much wider demographic for a product than they'd assumed, and that enabled them to build that category by about 15%. So again, sometimes things that appear quite obvious in their nature are unmasked when you have the data to really support it.
Great. So what we want to talk about now is actually how do you orchestrate some of these, agentic AIs on the topic in the space of decision intelligence. And so, Olia, why don't you take it from here?
Thank you, Lenny. I will not uncover anything new, but as a footprint, as a human being, we produce a lot of data. And just if you think about an enterprise, there's a lot of data. Your CRMs, your ERPs, your manufacturing IoT devices, your demand signals, your marketing signals, everything in the enterprise is producing massive amounts of data. But yet, data without action is meaningless. And to Jan's and Lenny's examples earlier, agility plays a big part of it, right? Because whether we like it or not, we rely heavily on our subject matter data experts. And sometimes it takes weeks to collect the relevant information and synthesize it and make decisions whether you are looking at the effectiveness of your marketing campaign and deciding on whether to reinvest or move your money somewhere else, whether it's inventory management, everything else. Agility, latency, and accuracy are playing a big part, right? Now, when we talk about AI, we've had AI capabilities for many, many years, from natural language processing to computer vision to optimizations, etc., right? So there's been a big boost in reading invoices and entering into your accounts payable systems or dealing with unstructured text or pictures to synthesize and maybe increase product descriptions. But now, in the past 12 to 18 months, a new term kind of entered our vocabulary, agentic AI. And I think the key difference here is that now it is enabled to add context to decision intelligence. So the growth of large language models, and you hear terms like Claude, OpenAI, DeepSeek, and many others, right? There's a lot of industry competition happening out there, which model is more optimized, but I'm not going to advocate which one it is. But the key element that differentiates everything is how do you observe, understand the signal, take actions, learn, and make decisions, obviously with human in the loop. And I just wanted to highlight there's key four characteristics that define agentic AI. First is autonomy and self-optimization. Is like, how do I analyze data, weight options, and execute decisions, right? How do I use reinforced learning for the dynamic reward functions without any type of hard coding in my logic? Second, and this is a very important, AI needs a playbook. They need to understand, how am I making a decision? What is the best decisions? How do I interpret the signals, right? What's my playbook in terms of how do I optimize, reinforce, and recommend, right, towards specific outcome? And I think Lenny, when he goes deeper in his examples, he will talk a lot about those types of KPIs and how do you create that playbook for making the decisions, because not just humans, AI agents rely on those too. Now, the other one is adaptations, and many systems kind of freak out when there's a lot of data changes, but I think agentic AIs thrive on it. I think they operate in a very dynamic environments. You've heard a lot of examples maybe in finance where, high frequency trading, where they're interpreting a signals at the milliseconds and making decisions on the fly. And now the rest of the industries are trying to catch up and apply similar type of strategies and bring it to the supply chain world, marketing world, and um, other aspects. And the final and the most important one is a continual learning. And I think it's not just the humans providing the reinforcement. I think the technology is moving to the world is that you can actually have large learning models to actually be referees and looking at the different outputs and actually feeding that into the loop, whereas the humans can make those assessments and improve the performance. Now, adoption is growing, and as you can see on the right, there's definitive metrics in terms of agentic AI, accuracy, response, scale, and ability to reliably operate. Now, there's still autonomous is a tricky word, right? Because there still has to be a human in the loop, and everything else, uh, avoiding bias, making sure that AI is ethical, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But at least agentic AI is pivoting and taking the best out of each capability. Like I said, natural language processing, computer vision, and other terms, and providing context, orchestrations, and driving that enablement across organizations.
Thanks, Oleg. So let's talk a little bit more about these, agents, and we'll talk about, decision agents. From our definition, and this can be debated a bit, but when we talk about decision agents, what we mean is purpose-built agents that either assist, augment, and/or automate different steps of a decision-making process, right? And really, all decisions are not created equal. Some are better suited for more automation. Some are better suited for less automation, depending on the level of data homogeneity, amount of stakeholders in it, the actual risk of the decision, and things of that nature, right? But generally, as we'll go through the example here, we'll think about three different types of agents. One is the insight agent, helping understand what's actually happening, right? So these agents will help detect those decision triggers. They'll understand the questions within the decision context. They'll be able to pull and connect data sources, synthesize that data, and provide that fit for those purpose insights, right? So what is actually that information telling us in the context of those questions? Then there's recommendation agents, right? What should we do? So those help in terms of framing the decision logic, understanding the interrelationship between the insights, contextualizing and automating those recommendations, and helping you act on those recommendations. And then the optimization agents, right? So the decision gets done, and then how do we improve it over time, right? So things like recommending the next business question or driver to ask, monitoring and evaluating those outcomes, and then improving those recommendations through those feedback loops, right? So we'll talk about those three levels here, in this example, but keep in mind that little flow that I had talked about in the past, right? The decision trigger, decision model and orchestration, decision making, execution, and then learning and optimization as I go through this example. So let's take an example, right? So the first step is essentially analytically connecting the various, we'll call it leading indicators versus lagging indicators, right? So if market share declines, okay, we could consider that a lagging indicator. A lot of different things had to happen for market share to decline, right? And so what we need to understand when we get to leading indicators, okay, how does the various metrics that are connected to market share, how do they impact that that final KPI, right? And so we could see here, if we're looking at a retail example, maybe we're looking at market share is driven part by volume, and volume is driven by potentially price gap. Okay, what drives that price gap? Cost of goods sold, promotional investments, consumer sentiment, other elements like that, right? And what a insight agent will then do is understand, okay, what is actually driving that change, right? So we can say, okay, cost of goods sold is the main driver of gross margin decline. And then that tells us, okay, we need to actually make a decision around that. How should we respond to commodity cost increases? Maybe it's Olia who is in charge of that decision, and that decision gets routed for him to start making it. Then the next step, we then need to actually understand, okay, how do we actually structure this decision logic, right? What questions, sub-questions do we need to answer? which role or team or people within the organization should be responsible both for the decision as well as those inputs, as well as do we have the data to answer the questions, or do we need to rely on some type of human experience, expertise, or some other source to get to that information, right? And then finally, once we have that decision logic together, connecting it to the actual data sources, all of a sudden these decision agents start working together, from the insight agents that are pulling the right information, the recommendation agents that are reading that data, synthesizing it, interpreting it among the answers, and then providing it to the recommendation. That decision is made. We're tracking those decisions over time. And from there, we could then identify, okay, what are the decision insights? What works, what doesn't work when we're making these decisions? How do we improve the decision quality? How do we improve the speed? What questions should we be asking in the future for us to actually optimize for that decision model, right? And then how do we actually help people within that process by giving them those prompts throughout the actual decision-making process so they can make better decisions in the future? We're going to do a demo and we're going to show this to you live here in a second. But really, the knowledge graph is the critical component. So when we design these various decision agents, what we need to understand is really, okay, what is the business decision that we want to make, right? So imagine it's, do we need to optimize our media spend? All right, what are the key business issues or questions that we need to ask? What are the insights needed? What are the variables that will help us understand those answers to those insights? And then what data sources need to be connected for us to actually do that, right? And that data piece is incredibly important and something that we see, so often in the, AI agentic context, but even outside of that context, right? So much money has been spent on building out data infrastructure, acquiring data assets, democratizing all the information via business intelligence dashboards, putting in more advanced capabilities around there. But too often, both the business stakeholder side, they say, I've got all of this information, I've got all of this technology assets, I've got all this data. How do I make a decision around where should I innovate? Or how should we grow the business, right? And what we see in that data to decision disconnect is really about 60% of that investment is wasted, meaning the actual decisions made did not use the inputs from that overall process, right? It's very much more human driven. And so Nick's going to talk a little bit here about how do you actually get the right data infrastructure and the data product in place to really start optimizing on those decision or realizing those decision agents.
Thank you, Lenny. Yeah, as the technology evolves, and there's a lot of investments and innovation happening across the hyperscalers, Google's, Microsoft's, Amazon of the world, and others, organizations are still having multiple barriers, and I just want to talk and highlight some of the challenges and the approaches to solving them. So let's unpack this. As I mentioned, organizations are drowning and starving for the decisions. And the gap between raw data and actionable intelligence isn't just a technology challenge, right? It's a strategic roadblock. The most common one is a data quality, access, and connectivity. Bad data means bad decisions, and it's driven by incomplete, siloed, or unreliable data that's a lot of members, including data scientists, very highly paid professionals, are wasting time cleaning up that data. Just to give you an example, I was doing a remodeling project and I went online and for Home Depot and just to make sure that certain products that I needed to finish my projects were available at the store. And yes, they had, at least they indicated that in stock on the shelf, 10 items. I drive by and it's not there. So obviously I'm dissatisfied. My project is delayed. And now, the brand loyalty is a little bit taking a hit. But again, it's due to a very simplistic fact that the data didn't sync up in time or it was not rendered correctly. So to address this, there's some ways, and AI plays a big part in it too. It's like, how do you drive data contracts with your data suppliers? And building the tools around schema validation and the freshman checks. For example, I'm expecting to get a million rows every day from this X system. Today, I'm getting 700,000. Maybe I should flag it or trigger for somebody to actually take an immediate action, right? How do I make sure that there are no blanks or other anomaly detections through my automated data pipelines? And again, there's a lot of new technologies. I'm not going to go into depth, but there are tools available, and we, as a solution technology company are bringing a lot of expertise to how to address those points. And finally, as the data needs to be findable, you need to understand how it evolves, how the KPIs are constructed, and to make sure that you're not reinventing the wheel twice and the same formula is applied consistently through your different brands or global markets. The second one, the emphasis is really, again, how do I connect multiple data sources to drive holistic recommendations? Like I said, each organization has a ton of different systems. They have their websites, they have their CRMs, they have their call centers, they have ERPs, they have spreadsheets, right? Without unification, AI will only see just part of the pictures, right? So, for example, as you know, with our marketing example, if I need to optimize the campaigns based on the clicks, but I don't have the context from my CRM data, which clicks actually convert to revenue, I may be missing a little bit of a solutioning capability. So the way to address this is to apply unified knowledge graphs and providing very robust context and semantic layer, bringing into your data catalogs and create data stewardships across domains that are providing context, both business and technical, and have a bronze, silver, and gold medallion architecture where applicable to drive efficient data products, which I'm going to talk a little bit about later. And the third one is really, I have the data for the past 20 plus years. We've been investing heavily in Tableaus, Power BIs, and other visualization tools. But now what, right? What does my observation tell me, right? Dashboards just tell you what happened, but not what to do next. So now the emphasis is to drive unbiased, transparent, AI-ready ML data factories that are focused on the closed loop intelligence, where insight signals trigger actions under the human supervisions. So those are the barriers, some of the key barriers from data quality to data harmonizations to providing context to decision intelligence. And there are tools in the ecosystem to address that. Let's go to the next slide. It is of a little bit of a busy slide, but I'm going to try to provide the context for a modern data ecosystem. First, it needs to have a mission, and the mission should be acting as an enabling force to drive cross-functional impact on business decision-making, right? And taking advantage of all available data assets to make AI-enabled data ready. From a design perspective, obviously, not many organizations are starting from the green field. So you have a lot of legacy, potentially technical debt and other. But the conceptual design of the modern data platform must be a scalable solutions where each component, whether it's ingestion, storage, compute, right, where it provides a level of isolations because technology moves so quickly. A new player or a new innovation comes up every 3 to 6 months. So what you want to do is to build in that into your design and that you can extend, replace, and optimize your components as time permits to make it scalable, cost efficient, and others. I've seen implementations where customers were making a big bet, and all of a sudden their cloud costs, instead of $20,000 a month bill, are skyrocketing to $80,000 or $100,000. So all of those things need to be taken into considerations. But there are some key pillars that need to be considered, right? Your platform needs to be driving toward the self-service capabilities, where technology is not the provider but an enabler, right? How do you drive that type of data democratization and transparency, leveraging the modern data stacks or the modern data catalogs? How do you capture the metadata layer and business semantic layer to give your data assets context? And how do you create a marketplace through your data products that people can see what's available and what knowledge can I derive, right? And finally, with AI-enabled decision intelligence capabilities, how do I take that knowledge and build actions around it? And again, here are some of the examples, whether you're immersion, inventory, marketing, doesn't matter who's a persona is in the organization, there can always be a use case that understands what value, what decisions, what data do I need, and what source systems to support it. And hopefully on the background, through this type of purpose-built products and capabilities, you have very agile way to launch those use cases and drive, right? And the final piece I'll just say is that it's never about technology, right? It's always in the context of people, processes, and organization. Technology is the easiest part, but we all have to make sure that we understand the personas and the purpose and the values that they're trying to generate out of the system. Next slide, please. I've used the term data product, and I think it may evolve eventually into AI-ready data or maybe some other term. But what all it means is that just like any other widget that we purchase or use in our everyday life, right? A data product has raw materials, and it's meant to be reused and extended to meet the broad range of different use cases. Let me give you an example, right? A data product that's looking at our consumer. So over time, it can evolve to include our transactional data. It can include our demographic data. It can help connect to see what my loyalty, and I may have been interacting with this brand or product since I was in college, but I'm evolving. Now I have a family, then I have kids. So it's how do you track from the first click on the website from an unknown registered user to the point that I'm a student, I'm a father, and how are my tastes, preferences, channels change over time. So as you think about that from a product perspective, is that how do you collect the relevant information? How do you expose it to your internal stakeholders, external stakeholders via dashboards, via AI-enabled capabilities, or through even APIs if you're trying to monetize your data, right? But always have that in mind. Who's your target persona? What value you're trying to bring? And what are the raw materials that need to make this data product work? And again, just like everything else, just like your mobile application on your phone, data product will have incremental releases. And maybe today it has two data sources in kind of harmonized. With the next release, you're bringing additional data sources and you're building the capabilities that this data product can serve to the market. And according to McKinsey, regardless of what size of organization, if it's a small mom and pop or a global organization, ultimately, it comes down to anywhere between 5 to 15 data products that will cover all aspects of your organizations. And if you start applying that type of mindset of a verticalizations of your data assets, you will drive your innovation and use cases, whether it's AI-enabled use cases or anything else, by 40%, just by thinking and applying this data as a product strategy. So with that in mind, earlier this year, DataArt and Cloverpop entered into a strategic partnership agreement where we thought this amazing opportunity of closing the data to decision divide and addressing some of the challenges that I spoke earlier, right? And bringing Cloverpop and their playbook and decision intelligence capability across different domains and DataArt's technology solutions, frameworks, and accelerators to build this pyramid of connecting raw sources, transforming them into informations, turning informations into knowledge, and ultimately building wisdoms by evaluating how effective our decisions and how we can improve over time. So if, again, as Lenny mentioned, he's going to go into the demo mode right now, but if you have technical questions or capabilities evaluating different technologies, please let us know and we can evaluate it after this webinar.
Thanks, Oleg. So let's do a quick demo just to show you a little bit of what a decision agent actually looks like. And I've got a bit of a demo here and essentially a little bit of context before we get into this, right? So this is an example where the system is connected to sources around brand equity, POS, and some other, commercial data sources. And here we could see, the decision trigger. It's underneath seeing that, perhaps the brand funnel is waning and something, within creative needs to be improved. And so we could quickly click on, this decision area, and all of a sudden a playbook shows up, right? So we can see here, what is the decision to be made? Do we need to adjust our creative? And we've listed out a set of different, business questions that need to be answered for us to actually make that type of a decision, right? And where you see with this D with the scope, this is a different type of a decision agent that is set up to pull the right data, interpret it, analyze it, and then answer these questions. And then you have a parent, we'll call this the recommendation agent, that is understands how these various KPIs that are connected to these questions interact, and then what the actual recommendation should be. So let's get that process started. So let's say, do we need to adjust our creative? And I'll say, for the Good Line brand, I'll go ahead and get that process going. Now, in this case, we could go ahead and make any adjustments to the actual decision logic that we want to, right? So this is the first place that we're thinking about human in the loop. However, the system also is trained on lots of decisions that have been made in the past. And so it could provide us with different types of recommendations that we might need to add to that decision tree to make sure that that decision is holistic, right? Now, let's say, I want to add my own question. I want to add a driver around, how is my brand funnel performing among Hispanic consumers? In this case, the system will actually start looking through those data sources and pre-filtering those to see, okay, can we actually answer this question with the data on hand, right? So it's looking through it. Looks like nothing is potentially there. Oh, looks like we do have brand funnel KPI pops up, and we could actually add that to the tree itself. So we've got our decision logic. We want to go ahead and start the decision. And within each one of these nodes, of course, a person can come in, review the actual data sources, right? And it's important to note that now we could actually see the appropriate data, the right data, in the right context, at the right time. So everything is fully visible for us right here, right? So we need to answer something about mental presence. We could find that information. It's been pulled in for us as well, right? Additionally, we could interact with the data in natural language. So we could ask it questions. It will provide us with the information. It will also pre-filter the appropriate data sources for us to work with. Now, we've got all the data connected. We've got all these questions that we need to answer, but I don't want to go through and have to do all that work myself. I'd like the the insight agent to actually answer all these questions for me. So we'll go ahead and complete the drivers. And what the system is right now doing is live pulling the appropriate data in that right context and synthesizing that information and answering each one of those business questions. And so just like that, the system has now answered every single one of those questions. And it's doing it in both a traceable and a transparent way, right? Traceable in the sense that we know exactly the business logic that it's using, and transparent in the sense that we could actually go back and see all of the data that is informing that, right? So it's fully auditable in the sense, right? Once we have all of this information, and keep in mind, we don't have the recommendation yet, right? This is the insight agent pulling the information, answering the questions for us. Now I could go ahead and actually create the recommendation. And the system is looking through it. It understands how those various questions relate to one another. What happens when, let's say, our innovativeness scores are going down versus our, top of mind awareness going up, and all those different elements, right? And it'll provide us with that overall recommendation. And now as a decision maker, I could focus more on the strategic element and those types of things, right? And all of these decisions, once they're made, and I could just go ahead and, imagine I go ahead and make this decision. It now creates a decision record. I could request approval. I have the full, list of all these elements here. We could share this externally with a, decision memo. But all of this creates a new type of data called the decision as a data source, right? And all of that information is now accessed via the decision bank. And this is essentially what the system is now doing to train, learn, and improve on. You'll see a lot of the same decisions here from the demo environment. But as the system collects more and more decisions, then it's able to provide better and better recommendations for the end user as well. Right? So that is, what a decision agent looks like. This is, would fall into that second level of decision agents. Keep in mind, we talked about human-led, AI assisted. The second one was AI augmented decisions, and the third is AI automated. This is the case where it's AI augmented, right? So AI is actually helping us answer these questions, but the human is still driving the decision-making process itself. So we have about 5 minutes left. Just want to open up the discussion to any questions that you might have, and we'll take it from there. Yeah, I'll maybe kick it off from thinking about that data to decision connection, right? And thinking about those data products. I mean, how do you typically start from a data product standpoint? We have to make decisions. First step is creating some of these data products. I mean, how do you typically approach that type of a problem, and how long does it typically take?
Yeah, great question, Lenny. Like everything else, data products is not about having good data, it's about what value it needs to generate. And it's impossible to boil the ocean because, like I said, even in my consumer example, you may end up over the life of the evolution of that product with up to maybe dozen plus different systems. So the important thing to know is A, what value-based strategies and use cases we want to support, right? How do we correlate value, effort, and impact? So that starts with understanding who are your personas are, whether they're people or even maybe processes, and thinking, okay, if I were to start my most valuable product for the first release of my data product, what answers, what capabilities, what guardrails I need to have built into the data product. So it all starts out with what are my business needs, what are my capabilities, and kind of following in a similar fashions to your value tree from KPIs and decisions that need to be made to the source systems that need to support it, and applying that value added matrix of impact and effort, and going from there, building that your first release of your data product.
Thanks, Jack. Yeah, and we have another question. I think you'd maybe be a bit more better suited from, but from a driving organizational change, and really thinking about the processes. What do you see as success in terms of really bringing AI to the enterprise and driving that real adoption?
Well, it is a great point because I think fundamentally it's about trust. And what's been interesting thus far is that you find that organizations have used data over a long period of time. Um, Sometimes not necessarily well. Sometimes, as we've already discussed, the data is flawed in itself, and that's led to issues. But if you get past that, I think you get to a point where it becomes about the confidence in the decision being made. And so initially, it's ensuring that there's foundational data that everybody can sign up to. And then secondly, it's about moving from that point around human interaction through to a model that is agentic in its full capacity. And I think that's a process that most organizations would need to work through to build a level of confidence so that in certain areas and areas they're comfortable testing into, they can move to agentic decisioning without it compromising something. And that testing opportunity, I think, is really critical for businesses because it'll allow them to understand that, it is very viable for business rules to be the wrap around the process and actually to monitor how those business rules are adhered to then come to the outcomes that they'll achieve by using the process itself. So I think it's really about test and learn, funnily enough, being confident enough to take steps towards the proposition. And I think the initial phases are really important because those elements of firstly identifying key objectives, then secondly applying the testing structure to say, we've used this from a let's call it human observation point of view. So you go from the interaction of the human to the human observing the process, and then really seeing what those outcomes look like. And then I think you'll find that it's very difficult to not move forward with it. I just think it's going to take a little bit of time.
Great. Thanks, Jan. So everybody, thank you so much for joining the webinar. As a follow-up, we'll be sending everybody that's attended a copy of this presentation. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. All of our emails are on the right-hand side here. If you'd like a demo, please also reach out. You can either contact us directly or book a demo at cloverpop.com. But the recording, the actual presentation is going to be sent out to everybody. Feel free to share it. And thank you so much for joining us on this Monday morning. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.